beginnings of the industrial growth were started during the Civil War. The greatest surge of expansion began when the war and Reconstruction ended. Industrial expansion and immigration completely changed the U.S. from agricultural to industrial and from rural to urban. The Industrial Revolution, along with immigration, made the United States soon evolve into a major world power. The nation's phenomenal industrial growth was spurred by the three fortuitous circumstances. First, the United States was blessed with a seemingly infinite amount of natural resources, including coal, iron, oil, copper, zinc, gold, and silver reserves. On top of this, there were generous helpings of lumber as well as excellent farming conditions. Secondly, markets for America's industrial output were growing due to immigration. According to World Book Encyclopedia, from 1870 to 1920, nearly 25 million immigrants came to the U.S. This provided a vast industrial and agricultural workforce and an enormous number of customers for American goods. Finally, innovative industrial leaders emerged, including clever inventors such as Alexander Graham Bell and Thomas Edison, as well as resourceful business organizers like Andrew Carnegie and John Rockefeller. All of these forces combined to cause America's industrial production to grow exponentially into the 1900s. The U.S. was well on its way to becoming one of the greatest industrial producers in the world.
It is impossible to imagine America's dramatic industrial growth without advances in communication and transportation. Telegraphy, developed by Samuel F.B. Morse, connected Europe with the United States, providing immigrants communication with their families back home. In 1876, Alexander Graham Bell created the telephone, which would form the basis of the American Telephone and Telegraph Company. In 1877, Thomas Edison developed the phonograph, and in 1878, the first practical glowing lamp. He was on the way to develop the means to produce and distribute electricity to produce everything from doorbells to street lights. Producing and distributing electricity had a ripple effect on increasing factory productivity. With artificial light, manual labor could be done past sunset. Also, electric and steam-powered machines allowed for mass productions. Transportation was total massive expansion of railroads and steamboats. Also, two bicycle mechanics, Orville and Wilbur Wright, developed an airplane in 1903 at Kitty Hawk, which in time allowed travel by air. Landscapes, including rivers and boundless land, were utilized locomotives, which allowed America's vast raw materials to be transported over long distances in shorter periods of time. Before 1865, most businesses had been owned by a single entrepreneur or by a select partnership. As business and the economy grew, it was evident that smaller competing businesses were not the most apt for maximizing profit. Merchants began to form large corporations by buying and merging small firms. Two prime examples of this were steamboats and improved Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller. Carnegie, a son of a Scottish immigrant, assembled the Carnegie Steel Company by assembling all the elements that are included in a steel production: coal and oil mining, water and rail shipping to plants, steel making and shipping to customers, all into one giant enterprise. Rockefeller brought together many small independent oil refineries and combined them into one company known as the Standard Oil Company, which controlled virtually all oil production in the United States by 1880. While it may appear that these two businessmen would contribute mightily to economic growth, they actually created monopolies in their fields, nullifying any competition for transportation whatsoever, which allowed them to be in control of essentially everything. The public cried out for government help and intervention. Federal government responded with legislation to protect the people. The Interstate Commerce Act of 1887 kept railroads from giving lower prices through rebates to some large businesses. The Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 was passed to protect trade and commerce against unlawful restraints and monopolies. These laws had little effect, however, since high governmental officers had little interest in placing limitations on large industrial companies. Industrialization changed the role of the worker in the United States economy from working transformed with them working in fields to working in factories. While the Carnegies and the Rockefellers, as well as the middle class, made up of mainly businessmen and clerical workers, were benefiting from the industrialization. The industrial laborers, however, were not. They worked 70-hour weeks for less than 20 cents an hour, often in dirty and hazardous conditions. By 1900, 2 million children were working in factories. Life for this class was very unsecure. An injury, for example, could throw a worker out of work without pay. Also, several depressions. There were high demand for jobs, but low supply of employment opportunities to this blue-collar working class. Also, there were no government programs at this time to support the lower class. The workers made several attempts to unionize themselves to try to get management to agree on higher wages, caused unemployment in tenure cycles, in these depressions, and ending child labor. The Knights of Labor was a labor union and was formed in 1869 in Philadelphia. They were successful in creating reforms including the 8-hour workday and strict laws against child labor. Union supporters were accused of being socialists or communists and were widely thought to be un-American. Business owners and managers were generally hostile to members of the labor unions. The government also thought unions were useless, saying that they defied antitrust laws. Nevertheless, labor strikes were frequent, bloody, deadly, and unsuccessful. Up to the 1830s, 25 million immigrants migrated to the United States. They were pushed to America from their native countries by such things as avoiding starvation, seeking adventure, diseases, natural disasters, and various oppressions. Immigrants were also pulled or drawn to America because of the economic opportunities it possessed, as well as desire of freedom. New and bigger ship designs allowed for easier and larger amounts of immigrants to come to America. New York was a major import city for these immigrants coming from the Europeans. Working conditions, which is partly why New York City today is such a melting pot of cultures and races. The Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island were symbols that the immigrants had made it across the Atlantic. Immigrant totals tripled throughout the 1840s, caused by famine and political unrest in European countries like Ireland and Germany. In that decade, 1,700,000 immigrants arrived in the United States, and in the 1850s, nearly 2,600,000 more made the immigration to the U.S. Over the next 3 decades, 10 million more arrived from mainly Great Britain, Ireland, Germany, and other European countries. This migration was known as the Old Immigration.
The period of migration after 1885 was known as the New Migration. It consisted of more immigrants from Austria-Hungary, Italy, Russia, and southern and eastern Europeans. Due to government-backed irrigation, newfound farmland meant that there were more new jobs in the Southwest. Employers hired Mexican laborers to work on farms as well as in mines. An immigrant's life was not easy by any means. Many had to face discrimination, violence, stereotypes, and prejudice. The flood of immigration alarmed many native-born Americans because of job competition from foreigners, while others did not like the religion or politics they brought. They also believed that it distributed America's unity. It was not until 1882 that the United States placed any restrictions on immigration. Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, which barred and further immigration from China, and in 1907 the United States concluded a gentleman's agreement with Japan to exclude any further immigration from that country.
Shorter hours, better.
The population growth increased the demand for goods and the amount of customers for newly American-produced goods, as well as supply labor and human resources to the vast businesses. Because of the high demand for jobs but low supply, employment during these times was scarce. This caused many people to move south and west to find new jobs. Due to the mass amounts of immigration and economic opportunities in the United States evolved over countries into urbanization and the creation of centralized cities. Factories and such were often placed within cities' limits. These centralized factories caused for high amounts of air and water pollution. Electric trolleys, cars, elevated trains, as well as the subways enabled these cities to expand beyond all previous thoughts. Also, the creation of the automobile and the household availability of them caused for cities to have suburbs and rural surroundings. Were strong believers in socialism. This political system gave equal opportunities and wealth among all citizens and put the government in more control. The problem with this idea was that the middle and upper class had no incentive to continue striving as they had previously had because of their wealth was being distributed and not gaining individual wealth. In contrast, capitalism provided less government intervention, which brought broader opportunities to the people.
At a time when the U.S. looked gold on the outside, it was truly cold and gray. The greedy upper class created monopolies using their money and power to buy out the competition. They would also hide much of their wealth in stocks and bonds so they did not have to pay taxes to the government. Also, the terrible working conditions were very harsh and dangerous. When people flooded into the cities, illnesses
The new immigrants and laborers
and disease was able to spread more and more, especially among the lower society. City leaders also accepted bribes from the rich, which made it seem like nobody was there to help the poor. Progressivism, however, was formed mostly by the middle class to improve the life of the hardcore laborers and fix the corrupted state of the United States. Teddy Roosevelt was America's first progressive president. Between 1901 and 1909, he dedicated his presidency to break up many trusts and much of the corruption caused by the big enterprises. Roosevelt's Square Deal was designed to give everyone from laborers to businessmen an equal chance in achieving their American dream. He established the first federal income tax in the United States. Also, to help rid the spread of disease and protect consumers, he established a Pure Food and Drug Act. Lastly, progressives wished to have women the right to vote. And finally, under President Wilson, the 19th Amendment was passed, giving women the right to suffrage. All of this helped improve the life of the lower classes. Roosevelt and the progressives gave everyone opportunity and equal chances to succeed in America.